I want you to picture a scenario. It's the winter of 1932, right?
Okay, setting the scene. I like it.
Right, so we're in Schenectady, New York, and a local radio station there makes this tiny, totally minor scheduling error.
Like they played the wrong record or something.
Close. They accidentally skipped a single broadcast of this serialized audio drama, just one episode.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and within minutes, the station's switchboards are completely paralyzed. I mean, paralyzed. Listeners are calling in, and they are in a state of absolute sheer panic.
Wow. Over a skipped show.
Yes. They were demanding to know if the family featured in the show had died. I mean, people were genuinely deeply distressed. They were acting as if their own literal relatives had just gone missing without a trace.
That is wild. I mean, that's a level of attachment you just do not see anymore.
Exactly. And the family, of course, was completely fictional. They were the Barbers, who were the centerpieces of Carlton E. Morse's legendary radio epic, One Man's Family.
Right, right. A huge deal back then.
Huge. And today, for our deep dive into the source material, we are looking at a brand new piece of modern audio fiction that is, well, it's attempting to capture that exact same, almost dangerous level of audience obsession.
Which is a tall order these days.
It really is. It's a production from Chesterton Radio called The Brennans, and our mission today, okay, let's unpack this, is to do an extensive literary and mechanical breakdown of its very first release, Book I, Chapter 1.
Yeah, and we really want to figure out how a story about a completely ordinary family in Kansas is engineered to make you, the listener, care about them as if they lived right next door.
Right, because you think about your own family gatherings, right? The chaos, the inside jokes, the unspoken rules about who sits where, it's loud, it's overlapping.
Oh, totally. The sheer volume of everyone talking at once.
Exactly. And capturing that in audio is incredibly difficult. But what makes this such a fascinating case study is that the Brennans is attempting this in an era where audiences are, well, supposedly they're completely rewired.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we live in a media ecosystem that is just defined by true crime, high-stakes dystopian thrillers.
Everything is the end of the world.
Right. It's this constant dopamine-driven churn of apocalyptic storytelling. So the idea of anchoring a narrative on, whether or not a 10-year-old boy understands the importance of Sunday dinner, it feels incredibly counterintuitive.
It sounds boring on paper, honestly.
Right. It's quiet. It's grounded. Yet mechanically, when you dig into it, it is using some very sophisticated literary and psychological tools to pull the listener into its sort of microscopic ecosystem.
And that's exactly what I want to get into. Because to really understand the mechanics of what the Brennans is attempting today, we have to look back at the architectural blueprint it's drawing from.
Right, the Carlton E. Morse formula.
Yeah, One Man's Family, which debuted on the West Coast back in April 1932. Like, how does a show about a San Francisco stockbroker and his kids manage to hijack the American consciousness so thoroughly?
It's a great question.
I mean, people on the East Coast were staying up until 1 in the morning just to listen to it. What was actually happening under the hood there?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of the 1930s, right, we have to recognize the profound psychological impact of the Great Depression on how audiences consumed media.
Okay, yeah. Context is everything.
Exactly. People were dealing with these massive, uncontrollable macroeconomic forces that were literally tearing actual families apart.
Jobs disappearing, foreclosures.
Right. The societal foundations felt incredibly fragile. So Morse provided an anchor. But, and this is key, he didn't just write a daily soap opera. He essentially created an alternate reality that aged in real time.
Wait, real time? Like literally?
Literally. One Man's Family ran uninterrupted for 27 years. It ended in 1959. That is over 3,000 episodes.
That's just staggering. Over 3,000.
Yeah. And if a character had a birthday in real life, they had a birthday on the show that same week. If a character went off to war, the audience waited anxiously for letters from the front in real time.
Oh, wow. So you're literally aging alongside them.
Exactly. It wasn't just a story you consumed. It was a parallel universe you checked in on. It was a cohesive chronicle.
But, okay, let me push back on that a little bit. Wasn't that just a byproduct of the era? Like, we look back at the 1930s and assume audiences were just starved for entertainment.
Sure, they only had radio.
Right, so of course they got overly attached. But today, we have infinite choices. We think we invented deep lore and binge watching, but Morse was doing it back then. Does that slow burn format still work when a listener can just pause it and, I don't know, go watch a dragon burn down a city on a streaming service?
That is the exact tension at the heart of this deep dive.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. The mechanics of human attachment haven't actually changed. even if the technology has.
Okay, I'm listening.
What Morse understood, and what Chesterton Radio is clearly applying here with the Brennans, is that audience investment scales with specificity.
Specificity. How so?
Well, one man's family didn't take place in some generic anytown USA. It was hyper-specific. The Barbers lived in the Sea Cliff area of San Francisco.
Right, it was grounded.
Morse made sure you knew they could see the Golden Gate Bridge from their living room window. He even had live Foley artists in the studio recreating the exact sounds of San Francisco cable cars and coastal foghorns.
That's amazing.
It is, because that level of tactile geographic reality tricks the brain into categorizing the Barbers not as fictional constructs, but as distant neighbors.
Which brings up a really interesting structural choice that I noticed in the source material for the Brennans. Chesterton Radio doesn't call this episode 1.
Right, they use a different naming convention.
Yeah, the title of the track is explicitly Book I, Chapter 1, Sunday Dinner, and I read that Morse did the exact same thing back in the 30s. He categorized his 3,000-plus broadcasts into 136 books.
He did, yeah.
So, playing devil's advocate here, does formatting a show as Book I, Chapter 1 actually fundamentally change how a listener consumes the story? Or is it just like a pretentious marketing gimmick to make an audio drama sound more intellectual?
I mean, I hear that critique, but it is much more than a gimmick. It's actually a very deliberate cognitive framing device.
A framing device. Okay.
Think about it. When you tell a listener they are tuning into an episode of a show, you are signaling disposability.
Right. An episode is a one-and-done thing.
Exactly. It's a contained unit of entertainment. You consume it, it ends, and you move on with your day. But when you label something Book I, Chapter 1, you are forcefully activating the literary schemas in the listener's brain.
Oh, that's really interesting. You're changing their expectations before they even hit play.
Precisely. You are sending a psychological signal that says, this is a cohesive, long-form chronicle. The details you are hearing right now are going to matter 50 chapters from now.
So it changes how they store the information.
Yeah, they start passively listening for a quick punchline and start actively cataloging character traits, geographical details, familial tensions. It demands a different caliber of attention.
It's a contract, then. The creators are demanding a longer attention span up front, but they're promising that the payoff will be this sprawling, interconnected history.
Exactly. You're being asked to move into the neighborhood, essentially.
But, I mean, knowing how to structure a radio epic conceptually is only half the battle. Morse had 27 years to build his world. Chesterton Radio has maybe 5 minutes to hook a modern listener who has their finger literally hovering over the skip button.
It's a huge challenge.
So how do you bypass hours of heavy, boring exposition to introduce this massive family without it sounding like you're just reading a census report?
You cheat.
You cheat.
You cheat. And you do it by using one of the most effective narrative tools in literature. You enter the world through the eyes of a child.
Oh.
This is exactly what the Brennans does. The story doesn't open with this sweeping, omniscient overview of the town, and it doesn't open with the patriarch giving some heavy-handed speech about family values.
Which would just be so exhausting to listen to.
Completely. Instead, it opens on the steps of St. Benedict's Church with a 10-year-old boy named Tommy Brennan, who was just holding the hand of his grandfather, Patrick.
Which is such a brilliant Trojan horse method for delivering exposition. If you use an adult protagonist, they already know all the rules of their own family.
Right, they wouldn't question it.
So if an adult explains why Sunday dinner is important, it sounds so unnatural. It sounds like forced exposition. But a 10-year-old, he's essentially an insider who is still trying to figure out the source code of his own environment.
He's allowed to ask the obvious questions.
Exactly.
And Tommy is standing there in the summer sun, just pondering the quote-unquote institution of Sunday dinner. And through his internal monologue, we get this rapid-fire, highly efficient characterization of the rest of the family, based purely on how they react to this one meal.
Right. He recalls his dad saying Grandma will have it ready, his mom telling him not to dawdle.
But the sharpest needle drop is his memory of Aunt Claire.
Oh my gosh, Aunt Claire.
Right. Tommy remembers asking if he could skip Sunday dinner to go to a friend's house, and Aunt Claire told him, "You don't miss Sunday dinner unless you're dead, and even then, Grandma expects an explanation."
That single line of dialogue does more work than a 3-page character biography.
It really does.
It instantly establishes the stakes of the event, the absolute authority of the grandmother, and Aunt Claire's hyper-rigid personality. The text even notes that Aunt Claire always speaks as if life were a courtroom and she had been appointed judge.
Such a great line. But Tommy isn't just recalling jokes. He is trying to get to the bottom of the philosophy behind the meal. So he looks up at his grandfather, Patrick, and asks the literal question that we, the audience, are asking. Why is Sunday dinner so important?
And this is where we see the generational friction that is clearly going to drive the entire series. Patrick's response is just a masterclass in stoic, older generation characterization.
He doesn't launch into a sentimental monologue.
No, he looks at the street, watches all these families piling into their minivans, and just says, because people have to eat.
Which is such a classic, frustratingly practical grandpa answer.
It totally is. It completely shuts down the kid's philosophical meandering. But it's also hiding the ball, and Tommy knows it. Tommy pushes back and says, that can't be the whole reason.
And Patrick finally concedes, no, but it's a good beginning.
I love that. What is mechanically happening in this exchange, though?
Well, what's happening is the establishment of contrasting worldviews. And we see it not just in their dialogue, but in their physicality.
Oh.
The narrator explicitly notes how Grandpa Patrick moves. The text says, old men who moved weakly looked as if the world were pushing them. Grandpa Brennan moved as if he had simply decided the world could wait.
Wow. That line anchors Patrick as this immovable, grounded force. And it contrasts so sharply with how Tommy's father, Daniel, is introduced right after that. Daniel is standing by the car, and the author describes him as the sort of man who is always thinking about three practical things at once: the gas tank, the mortgage, and whether someone remembered to turn off the basement lights.
Patrick is entirely present, while Daniel is constantly projecting into the future, managing the logistical anxiety of adulthood.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, mechanically. Right as the author establishes this rather heavy adult thematic contrast between living the present versus managing the future, they completely undercut it with this brilliant injection of childhood chaos.
You're talking about the Moses stick.
I am absolutely talking about the Moses stick.
It's so good.
Daniel is stressing about logistics, trying to get Tommy's little sister Nora into her car seat, but Nora is refusing to let go of this random stick she found in the churchyard. Tommy, playing the rational older brother, asks her if it's a church stick, and Nora whispers, with utter seriousness, it's a Moses stick. Tommy points out the obvious flaw, you're not Moses, and Nora just fires back, I might be when I'm older.
It's hilarious, but you have to ask, why does it matter? Why dedicate precious word count in your opening chapter to a toddler arguing about a stick when you have a massive family saga to set up?
That's a great question. Why do that?
Because it calibrates the tone. If the entire chapter was just Patrick and Daniel having these brooding philosophical thoughts about the nature of time and family, it would become incredibly dense.
We feel like a lecture.
Exactly. It would be alienating. Nora's Moses stick acts as a pressure release valve. It grounds the story in reality. I mean, anyone who's ever interacted with a young child knows that a discarded stick can instantly become the most vital, magically imbued object in the universe.
Oh, totally.
It tells the listener, yes, we are going to explore deep themes, but we are going to do it within the messy, absurd, recognizable reality of a real family.
It builds trust with the listener. It proves the author has actually observed real human behavior. So they finally manage to wrestle Moses into the car, and the focus of the narrative pans outward. We move from the characters to the environment they're traveling through.
The town itself.
Right. And much like how Morse utilized San Francisco, Chesterton Radio is incredibly intentional about establishing the town of Atchison, Kansas, as a living, breathing character in the story.
Place is paramount in this genre. The physical environment dictates the psychological reality of the characters. And as they drive, the text delivers this incredibly evocative sensory world building.
The descriptions are amazing. We're told the town possesses a summer stillness that isn't exactly silence.
Right.
Listen to how the source material describes this. It says, somewhere a lawnmower was arguing with a patch of high grass. A train sounded far off nearer the river. Cicadas began and stopped in the trees as if taking turns. Down the hill, the Missouri moved unseen, but somehow always present, like a thought no one had spoken aloud.
The author is heavily playing with the neuroscience of audio fiction here.
The neuroscience. Unpack that for me.
Well, in a visual medium like television, the viewer is largely passive. The screen just shows you the river, the train, the trees. But in an audio drama, or when reading text meant to evoke audio, you are dealing with sensory deprivation.
Okay, because you can't see anything.
Exactly. And the brain abhors a vacuum. So when the narrator mentions the sound of a distant train or the rhythmic buzz of cicadas, your brain's visual cortex actually fires up to fill in the blanks.
Oh, wow.
The listener is forced to co-create the world of Atchison using their own memories of summer heat, their own memories of distant lawnmowers. It creates a far deeper cognitive investment than simply watching a pre-rendered image on a screen.
That is fascinating. And I feel like that cognitive co-creation reaches its absolute peak when they arrive at the physical Brennan house on Division Street.
Yes, the house itself.
It's described as white with green shutters, a broad porch, and, this is key, slightly uneven in a way everyone pretended not to notice.
Like a beloved, slightly worn-out sweater.
Yes. An old maple tree leans over the front walk. But the detail I want to zero in on, and actually maybe challenge you on a bit, is the screen door.
Okay, let's hear it.
The text states, the screen door had a slap that no one in the family could imitate, but everyone recognized. Now, my initial reaction to this was just a tiny bit skeptical.
Really? Why?
Well, doesn't that risk sounding like a cliche? I feel like every single small-town nostalgic story focuses on a slapping screen door. How does this author focus on the slap of a screen door rather than the architectural style of the home without it just being a lazy trope?
It's a vital question.
Oh.
But I think the line between a cliché and an archetype is execution.
Okay.
A cliché is a hollow shorthand. It's a writer pressing a generic button on a soundboard to say, hey, we're in the country now. An archetype, however, is a foundational psychological trigger.
So you're saying the screen door is an archetype?
Yes. The reason the slapping screen door appears so often in this genre is because it is a profoundly effective auditory anchor for the concept of home.
Ah, because audio fiction relies on sonic memory.
Precisely. You don't have the luxury of spending 5 minutes panning a camera across the architectural nuances of a house. You need an auditory shortcut. That unique, rhythmic slap of wood hitting the frame instantly communicates age, summer, informality, and a high volume of foot traffic.
It tells you this is a house that people are constantly running in and out of.
Exactly. It is the heartbeat of the property.
That makes so much sense. It's not just a sound effect, it's a metric of the family's activity level. So we've navigated the architecture of nostalgia on the outside, we've heard the archetypal slap of the screen door, and now we actually step inside.
Then brace yourself.
Right, because this is where the author decides to just drop the listener into the absolute deep end of a Sunday dinner, and I mean the deep end. We get hit with a tidal wave of characters in rapid succession.
It is a dizzying piece of pacing. The narrative shifts from that slow, observant drive through town into a rapid-fire staccato rhythm of overlapping dialogue and character introductions.
Let's analyze how the author introduces this massive cast, because they don't just give us a dry list. First, we meet Margaret, the grandmother.
Yeah.
She's wearing an apron faded from blue into a color that might have been sky if sky had been washed every week for 20 years.
Such evocative writing.
It really is. She's this matriarch who can look at a room and instantly know who is hiding a scraped knee and who brought store-bought rolls. Then we pivot to the dining room and meet Uncle Michael, who is already sitting in Grandpa Patrick's chair at the head of the table.
And the dynamic between Michael and Patrick is established entirely through physical territory and incredibly sparse dialogue.
It's brilliant.
Patrick walks in, Michael grins and says, "Look at this, I finally made something of myself." And Patrick doesn't yell, he doesn't posture, he simply says, "You're in my chair."
And Michael tries to deflect with, "A man can dream," but Patrick just delivers the final verdict, "Not in my chair."
It's phenomenal efficiency. In 4 lines of dialogue, we know Michael is the charming, boundary-pushing troublemaker, and Patrick is the immovable, traditional authority figure.
Then we get Aunt Claire, the grammar-correcting English teacher, who we are told can stop an argument just by looking at it. We meet Grace, a 14-year-old cousin who is reading a massive novel and basically views the actual real world as an unfortunate interruption scheduled between her chapters.
And notice how the author uses physical props to build character traits instantly, bypassing the need for heavy adverbs.
Right, like with Aunt Anne.
Exactly. We meet Aunt Anne, who arrives looking intensely apologetic, specifically because the crust on her pie browned too quickly. That single prap, a slightly overbaked pie crust, tells us everything about her anxiety and her desire to please.
We also meet Leo, the weary block builder. He's Grace's younger brother, and he's trying to build a bridge out of wooden blocks on the floor for Nora's doll.
Ah, yes, the return of Nora's theological playtime.
Nora has declared that because of the Moses stick, her doll is now a Hebrew doll traveling to Egypt. Leo, the aspiring engineer, complains that her bridge isn't historically accurate, and Nora just coldly replies, "It's not supposed to be history, it's escape."
What's fascinating here is how it's a wonderful comedic beat, but structurally it's doing so much more. The author is constantly weaving the family's faith into the narrative, but doing it organically.
It never feels preachy.
Not at all. It's deeply woven into the fabric of their lives. It's just the sociological reality of this Catholic American family. It's embedded in the casual mention of rosaries hanging from the rearview mirrors in the driveway, and it's embedded in how the children incorporate biblical narratives into their floor games.
Right. And the ultimate expression of that organic integration happens right before they eat. The chaos in the house is at an absolute fever pitch. Uncle Rob is there, who, by the way, isn't actually an uncle, just a childhood friend of Daniel's who has been attending these dinners for so long that no one remembers who originally invited him.
I love that detail.
And old Mrs. Donnelly from 2 houses down is there, claiming she only came for coffee but settling in for the entire meal. And amidst all this, Michael tries to steal a role before Grace.
And he is instantly met with a triangulation of glares. He gets a glare from Margaret, a glare from Claire, and a glare from little Nora, who the narrator explicitly notes enjoyed seeing justice applied to others.
I just love Nora so much. But then Patrick stands at the head of the table, and he doesn't have to shout over the din, he just bows his head. And the entire deafeningly loud room instantly settles. He begins, "Bless us, O Lord," and the text says the prayer moved around them like something older than the house.
It is a moment of profound auditory contrast. The author cranks the volume in the chaos up to 10 and then instantly drops it to 0, pivoting on the axis of that single prayer. It's a beautifully orchestrated scene.
It really is.
However, if we are looking at this from a critical editorial perspective, we have to acknowledge a potential risk here.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. The sheer volume of names dropped in the first 20 minutes. You're talking about cognitive overload for the listener, right?
Exactly. While throwing the reader into the deep end of a chaotic family gathering is incredibly authentic, it risks overwhelming the audience. You are asking a listener to track Margaret, Patrick, Tommy, Daniel, Nora, Michael, Claire, Grace, Leo, Anne, Rob, and Mrs. Donnelly, 12 distinct characters, many with overlapping dialogue, all very quickly.
So how do you fix that mechanically without ruining that chaotic, authentic vibe? Because if you stagger their entrances too much, it loses that tidal wave effect.
Well, this is where audio production techniques must compensate for the density of the text. An editorial tweak for future chapters might involve leaning even heavier into distinct vocal tics.
Okay, vocal tics.
Yeah, the directors of the Brennans have to utilize extreme vocal distinctiveness. You cannot cast actors with similar vocal timbres for Michael and Daniel.
Oh, that makes sense.
And you have to rely on spatial audio mixing, panning Uncle Rob's voice slightly to the left channel and Aunt Claire's sharp, clipped consonants to the right. The listener's ear has to be able to map the physical geometry of the dining room table solely through the equalization and pacing of the tracks when the dialogue overlaps.
That is a great editorial suggestion. The audio mix basically has to act as the listener's seating chart.
Exactly.
But once that prayer is finished, the true chaotic symphony of the meal begins. And the dialogue here, the humor, it's just spectacular. It acts as a ping-pong match across the table.
The pacing is relentless.
Michael starts telling this absurd story about a man trying to move a piano through a second-story window using a pulley. But Aunt Claire interrupts him before the piano even makes it off the truck to demand if there is a moral to the story.
And Michael, never missing a beat, says yes, the moral is don't own a piano.
And Claire simply says, rejected.
It's so fast and so funny. But amidst the passing of the potatoes and the spilled gravy, the author uses this overlapping dialogue to subtly smuggle in the central philosophical conflict of the entire series.
And this is where I really want to dive deep, because the entire tone of the chapter shifts on a dime based on a passing comment from Aunt Anne. This serious conversation emerges that basically anchors the entire chapter.
Right. And casually mentions, amidst all the clatter of silverware, that the Whitcomb place has been sold. She heard the gossip after Mass.
The Whitcomb place, yeah.
This is the big yellow house at the corner of the bluff with what she describes as a widow's walk. Though Michael immediately interrupts to clarify it's not a widow's walk, it's just a roof with ambitions.
That line got me. But when Anne reveals who actually bought the house, the temperature in the dining room noticeably drops.
She says a development company from Kansas City bought it. And rumors are circulating that they intend to buy up more of the old houses along the bluff to turn them into rentals or weekend homes.
And suddenly, the Brennan family table becomes a battleground for one of the most pervasive conflicts in modern American life: gentrification and the preservation of community.
It reveals the deep ideological divides within the family itself. Daniel, Tommy's father, takes the practical, pragmatic stance. He's the guy who worries about the mortgage, remember?
Right.
He points out that these massive old houses are incredibly expensive to heat and maintain. The roofs leak, the foundations settle. He argues that the local families simply don't have the capital to keep them from rotting.
It's hard to argue with the economics of it.
Exactly. He says if outside money comes in, restores the architecture, and brings in weekend visitors, it isn't entirely bad. It's just practical. He literally says, there are worse things than visitors.
And Patrick violently rejects that premise. He draws a very hard line between aesthetics and community. Patrick vehemently disagrees and states, there's a difference between a view and a home.
That is the philosophical weight of the argument right there.
Oh.
What we are witnessing is a clash of two very different metrics for measuring the value of a town.
Daniel is looking at property values, structural integrity, and economic viability.
While Patrick is looking at social cohesion, shared history, and the spiritual weight of a neighborhood.
And just as the argument threatens to really boil over, the author uses another brilliant character intervention. Grace, the 14-year-old who has been ignoring everyone to read her novel, suddenly looks up and cuts to the absolute heart of the issue.
It's a devastating moment.
She asks, what happens to a town when all the houses are owned by people who don't live in them?
It completely halts the conversation because it exposes the end game of Daniel's pragmatism. Even Aunt Claire, the eternal judge, has to nod and concede that it's a terrifyingly good point.
Grace gets embarrassed by the sudden attention and mutters that she just read it in her book. But the damage is done. The question just hangs over the table.
What constitutes a community? Is it merely a collection of preserved architectural assets? Or is it a web of lived, shared experiences? If you replace all the residents with transient visitors, you might save the physical boards of the houses, but you murder the town.
Right. And then little Nora, who has been quietly absorbing all this anxiety about strangers buying houses, raises her hand. She asks, very seriously, if someone buys their house, do they get the family too? Because she doesn't want to live with strangers.
The tension breaks. Everyone laughs.
But Patrick looks down the length of his table, looking at Michael's arrogance, Claire's rigidity, Daniel's anxiety, all their beautiful, chaotic disorder, and softly replies, neither do I.
That moment transitions us out of the loud, kinetic energy of the meal and sets up the thematic climax of the chapter. And the pacing here is just critical.
Yeah, they don't resolve it right then.
Exactly. The author doesn't resolve the argument at the table. They let it simmer. The women begin clearing the plates, the children scatter to the backyard, and the men retreat to the front porch. The audio landscape shifts completely from clinking silverware and overlapping shouts to the quiet rustle of the maple tree and the distant cicadas.
So what does this all mean? We get to this beautiful post-dinner porch scene between Daniel and Patrick, and it's really the emotional anchor of the entire narrative.
It is. Daniel brings the argument back up, but quietly this time. He isn't trying to win a debate. He is genuinely distressed.
He tells his father, I don't want the town frozen in place. I don't want to live in a museum.
And Patrick's response is incredibly revealing. He says, neither do I. Living things change. Dead things are rearranged.
Living things change. Dead things are rearranged. Wow.
That is the philosophical thesis of the Brennans distilled into a single sentence. Patrick is arguing that true, organic community development is messy, slow, and human. When a Kansas City company comes in, buys a house, guts it, and decorates it to look like a perfect, sterile country retreat for tourists, they aren't keeping the house alive.
They're acting as taxidermists.
Exactly. They are scooping out the soul of the home and rearranging its dead physical components to look aesthetically pleasing.
It's a gut punch of a metaphor. But Daniel, still clinging to his pragmatism, pushes back. He demands to know what exactly they are supposed to preserve if the buildings themselves are falling apart. He asks his father point blank, what are we saving? The boards, the memories, the address.
And Patrick looks out at the street and gives him a one-word answer.
The welcome.
The welcome. It is a profound conceptual shift. It completely recontextualizes the entire chapter. Why did the author spend so much time describing the uneven porch boards and the slapping screen door?
To prove that the physical perfection of the house is irrelevant.
Exactly. The house on Division Street is merely a vessel. The true inheritance of the Brennan family isn't real estate. It is the capacity for hospitality. It is the ability to absorb a childhood friend like Uncle Rob, or a lonely neighbor like Mrs. Donnelly, and feed them on a Sunday afternoon. The welcome is the invisible infrastructure of the community.
And this speculation, this debate, it sets the stage for future conflicts. The stakes aren't whether a meteor is going to hit Atchison, Kansas. The stakes are much more insidious and relatable.
Will the town be gentrified?
Right. Will the Brennans, who possess deep generational roots but clearly limited financial resources, be priced out of their own history? The tension between Daniel's pragmatism and Patrick's romanticism is the engine that will drive the plot forward for the next 100 chapters.
Absolutely. And as we move from that heavy realization into the final pages of the chapter, we witness what I consider the most elegant mechanical writing in the entire piece, the decrescendo.
The aftermath.
Yes. The brilliance of this script isn't just in how it handles a room full of shouting people, it's in how it orchestrates the silence that follows. The pacing of the final pages is masterful.
It perfectly mimics the deflation of a massive family event. It happens in these fragmented, overlapping, frantic departures. Rob heads to his truck, taking the wrench he's owned for 6 years, which the narrator dryly points out.
Grace realizes she left her Massig novel near the sprinkler and sprints to the backyard to rescue it, with the urgency of a mother rescuing a child.
And Nora's having a minor breakdown because her mother won't let her bring the filthy Moses stick into the clean minivan. The crisis is only averted when Grandmother Margaret intervenes and solemnly promises Nora that Moses will be given a secure retirement spot on the front porch, waiting like a prophet in exile until next Sunday. It ties off the comedic thread beautifully.
But the most poignant departure is the bookend to the opening scene. Tommy is having his final interaction with Patrick under the maple tree. Patrick looks down at him and asks the question that started it all. Did you find out why Sunday dinner is important?
And Tommy, who has just spent the last 3 hours absorbing all of these massive, terrifying adult anxieties about housing, gentrification, and the passage of time, answers with complete honesty. He admits he hasn't figured it out yet. He just says, not yet.
And Patrick's reaction is so gentle. He doesn't force a lesson on the boy. He just smiles, pats his shoulder, and tells him to come back next week. It's an invitation to keep participating in the messy process of growing up.
As the minivan pulls away, Tommy watches his grandparents growing smaller in the rear window. But the chapter doesn't end there, does it?
No, it doesn't.
The perspective completely detaches from Tommy. Throughout the chapter, the narrative voice has been closely tethered to his 10-year-old perspective. But in the final moments, the narrative voice shifts.
This raises an important question regarding the narrative voice. It zooms out into this fully omniscient, deeply warmed voice that hovers over the family almost like a protective spirit.
Right.
It has the ability to zoom in on Tommy's childlike wonder, then articulate Daniel's logistical worries, map the rigid geometry of Aunt Claire's mind, and finally, as the cars all drive away, it settles quietly into the kitchen with Margaret.
The closing image is incredibly cinematic. It's just Margaret, alone in the kitchen. The late summer sun is throwing long angles across the floor, the good plates are washed, the roasting pan is soaking, and the narrator explicitly makes a point to clarify her emotional state. It notes she is not lonely. Alone, there was a difference.
It is a vital distinction. Loneliness implies an absence, a void. Being alone in this context implies a hard-earned tranquility after a period of intense output. But the crowning mechanical achievement here is the author's focus on a single object.
The illustrative content here is stunning. Amidst the clean kitchen, we focus on a single, forgotten coffee cup sitting at the far end of the long table, right where Patrick had been sitting. How exactly does an author film a coffee cup in an audio format? How do you make silence compelling?
You do it through contrast and isolation. After 30 minutes of auditory assault, overlapping dialogue, clattering silverware, slamming screen doors, the sudden absence of noise creates a vacuum that forces the listener to lean in.
Oh, that makes sense.
By describing the single coffee cup, surrounded by empty chairs, you ground the listener in the specific melancholy sweetness of a Sunday evening, an event that has just concluded. You might hear the distant tick of a wall clock or the soft clink of Margaret wiping down the counter. The silence around the coffee cup echoes with the ghostly audio of the laughter from 20 minutes prior. It is a masterful manipulation of auditory space.
It really is. The final imagery the author leaves us with reinforces Patrick's entire argument. The text says that the house, having given itself away all afternoon, settled quietly into evening and waited for them all to return.
It reinforces the idea of the house as a living, breathing entity.
Yes, it intentionally expends its own energy to provide the welcome. And now, exhausted, it rests. As the sun sets on Atchison in Chapter 1, we look ahead to what this means for the listener who has just invested their time in this family.
And we evaluate the promise of the saga format. We return to the comparison with One Man's Family.
Right, because The Brennans is clearly not trying to create a direct imitation of Morse's work.
No, it operates in its own modern, distinct voice. The dialogue is sharper, the anxieties about corporate development are distinctly modern. However, it entirely embraces Morse's core radical belief that the greatest stories are found in the ordinary lives of ordinary people.
Exactly. You don't need extreme external stakes. You don't need a murder to have a mystery.
This first chapter succeeds wildly because it doesn't end on a massive cliffhanger. No one's life is hanging in the balance. A dark family secret wasn't revealed over dessert. The narrative hook isn't the cliffhanger. It's simply creating a world the listener wants to return to.
It's built on affection and curiosity.
Yes. You want to tune in next week to see if Uncle Rob actually remembers to return the pipe wrench. You want to see if Nora's doll makes it to Egypt. And on a larger scale, you want to know what happens to the Whitcomb house and how Daniel and Patrick are going to fight about it?
I would argue that in a media landscape obsessed with high-stakes apocalypse and true crime, The Brennans is essential counter-programming. It is a warm meal in an audio landscape of fast food.
That's a great way to put it.
But the question is, will modern audiences have the patience for it? Are we too wired for constant adrenaline to appreciate the quiet tectonic shifts of a Sunday dinner?
I think it will.
I think so too. I argue that underneath the modern addiction to anxiety-inducing media, there is a profound, unaddressed cultural starvation for genuine human connection. The craving for the welcome makes this more relevant than ever. When the real world feels overwhelmingly chaotic, there is immense psychological comfort in a story that reminds us of the enduring, messy strength of the family unit.
It acts as an auditory sanctuary. It proves that the microdramas of spilled gravy, territorial disputes over a dining room chair, and the anxiety of an over-browned pie crust are universally resonant because they are the actual textures of human existence.
Yes, exactly.
We saw how a single meal, viewed through the eyes of a 10-year-old and contextualized by an omniscient narrator, can reveal the deep fault lines and the immovable foundations of an entire community.
It's a remarkable piece of writing. So, to briefly recap our journey today, we started by exploring the historical roots of one man's family in 1930 San Francisco, looking at how it captivated an anxious nation. We then traveled to the contemporary breathing world of Atchison, Kansas.
We examined how the Brennans uses a child's perspective as a Trojan horse. We debated the auditory neuroscience of the slapping screen door.
We sat through the beautifully chaotic crosstalk of a massive Sunday dinner, and we unpacked the deep philosophical tension between Daniel's modern pragmatism and Patrick's fierce dedication to the welcome.
And we explored how the elegant decrescendo of the final departures and the cinematic isolation of a single coffee cup ground the listener in a profound sense of melancholy and anticipation.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the source material, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over or explore on your own. Think about the old wooden radio sitting silently on the Brennans' table, treated with the respect of an elderly relative. Every family has these artifacts. In your own home, what is that one silent, everyday object that holds the invisible history of your family? If a stranger walked in, would they just see a piece of furniture, or would they feel the welcome it represents?
It's a powerful question.
Take a look around your living room today and ask yourself what story your own walls are waiting to tell. Thank you so much for pulling up a chair and joining us on this deep dive into the sources today. Keep seeking out the extraordinary within the ordinary.